My house was destroyed in a fire, so I went to my son's house. But he screamed, "Get out. My girlfriend doesn't want you here." So I called my old love from my youth, a millionaire. When he showed up, before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The smell was the first thing that broke through the shock. It was a thick, acrid perfume of scorched memories and incinerated dreams, charred wood, melted plastic, and something deeper, something that smelled like 40 years of life turned to ash. I stood across the street, a ghost in my own life, watching the last of the gray smoke curl lazily into the twilight sky. The house, my house, was a blackened skeleton, a jagged wound against the soft hues of the setting sun. Firefighters, their faces grim and smudged with soot, moved with a practiced somber choreography, their heavy boots crunching on the wet blackened debris that littered the lawn. The flashing red and blue lights of the emergency vehicles painted the scene in frantic silent strokes of red and blue, a chaotic heartbeat for a life that had just flatlined. My hands, stained with soot and trembling, clutched the only thing I had managed to save, a shoebox. A simple cardboard shoebox from a pair of sandals I'd bought in the summer of '98. I had been in the back garden tending to my late-blooming roses when I heard the first crackle. By the time I'd rounded the corner of the house, the living room was an inferno. I had only had seconds. I'd run back in, the heat a physical blow, and grab this one box from the top of the hall closet. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was pure desperate instinct. Inside were the pictures, decades of moments captured on fading film. My late husband David, grinning on our wedding day, my son Donovan, a chubby-cheeked toddler taking his first wobbly steps on the very lawn that was now a graveyard of our life together. Me, younger, happier, standing proudly in front of this same house. The day we first bought it, the images were a roll call of a life that no longer existed, its container now a pile of smoldering ruins. A kind-faced paramedic had wrapped a coarse wool blanket around my shoulders. It did little to ward off the chill that had settled deep in my bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the autumn air. My neighbors murmured words of comfort, their faces etched with pity, but their voices were a distant buzzing drone. All I could hear was the roar of the fire in my memory, and the shattering of glass. My house was gone, David was gone, all I had left in the world was my son, Donovan. The thought of him was a lighthouse in a storm of despair. He would know what to do. He was successful, organized, he lived in a sleek high-rise downtown, a world away from this quiet suburban street. He would take me in, help me sort through the impossible tangle of what came next. He was my son, my blood, my only port in this catastrophic storm. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable from next door, gently touched my arm. "Rose dear, do you have somewhere to go? Someone to call?" "My son," I whispered, the words catching in my throat, thick with unshed tears. "I'm going to my son." Getting to Donovan's building was a surreal journey through a city that was suddenly alien to me. The familiar streets looked strange, distorted through my haze of shock. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, at my soot-stained face and the singed edges of my cardigan. I must have been a pitiful sight, a refugee from my own life. I paid him with the few crumpled bills I'd had in my pocket, the last of my cash, and stepped out onto the polished granite sidewalk. His building was a monument to modern, impersonal luxury, a sheer tower of glass and steel that scraped the sky. I walked into the lobby, the wool blanket still clutched around me, the shoebox held tight against my chest. The doorman, a young man in a crisp uniform, looked at me with alarm, his hand inching toward the phone on his desk. "I'm here to see my son," I said, my voice hoarse. "Donovan Miller, apartment 34B. He called up, his eyes never leaving me, his voice a low, suspicious murmur. A moment later he nodded curtly. "You can go up." The elevator ride was a silent, terrifying ascent. With each floor, the reality of my situation grew heavier. I was homeless. I was 62 years old, a widow, and I was about to throw myself on the mercy of my only child. The elevator doors opened onto a quiet, carpeted hallway. I walked to the end, to the door marked 34B, and knocked. My hand was shaking so badly that the sound was a weak, fluttering rap against the heavy wood. The door opened. Donovan stood there, a vision of jarring, immaculate health. He was dressed in expensive gray activewear, his hair perfectly styled. He looked handsome, successful, and completely untouched by the tragedy that had just consumed my world. Behind him, the apartment glowed with a soft, warm light, a picture of serene minimalist perfection. "Mom?" he said, his eyes widening, first in surprise, then in something else. Annoyance. "What are you doing here? You're a mess." "The house, Donovan," I stammered, the words tumbling out. "There was a fire. It's gone. Everything is gone." His face went slack with shock. But before he could say anything, a figure emerged from the living room behind him. It was his girlfriend, Simone. She was as sleek and polished as the apartment, dressed in a cream-colored cashmere lounge set. She stopped a few feet behind Donovan, her arms crossed, her sharp angular face a mask of undisguised contempt. She looked at my soot-stained clothes, at the rough blanket, at the scorched shoebox, and her lip curled in a tiny, almost imperceptible sneer. Donovan looked from my devastated face to Simone's cold, hard one. I saw a battle wage in his eyes, a flicker of filial duty warring with a desperate, weak-willed need to please the woman behind him. The battle was over in an instant. The weakness won. He took a step forward into the hallway, pulling the door partially closed behind him as if to shield his perfect apartment from the contamination of my grief. "Look, Mom," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "You can't stay here." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "What, Donovan? I have nowhere to go. My house is gone." "I know, and that's terrible," he said, the platitude sounding hollow and rehearsed. "But Simone, she's a very private person. We have a certain lifestyle. We can't have you here. It's not a good time." "A good time?" I whispered, my voice cracking. My life just burned to the ground. "There isn't going to be a good time." His face hardened then, the flicker of shame extinguished by a wave of petulant anger. He was angry at me, at my tragedy for inconveniencing him, for bringing this ugly, messy reality to his pristine doorstep. "I can't help what happened," he hissed, his voice rising. Simone, visible through the crack in the door, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval. It was all the encouragement he needed. He took a deep breath, and his next words shattered what was left of my already broken heart. He screamed. A harsh, ugly whisper scream that echoed in the quiet hallway. "Get out. Just get out. My girlfriend doesn't want you here." He reached into the pocket of his track pants and pulled out his wallet. He fumbled with it, his hands shaking with adrenaline, and pulled out a few $100 bills. He shoved them into my hand, his fingers recoiling from mine as if my skin were still hot from the fire. "Here," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and relief. "Go find a hotel or something. I'll call you in a few days. We'll figure it out." Before I could react, before I could even form a word of protest, he pushed the door closed. The heavy, solid click of the lock engaging was the sound of my last hope dying. I stood there in the silent, empty hallway, the crisp $100 bills crumpled in my fist, the smell of my burned-down life clinging to me like a shroud. My son, my baby boy, had just screamed at me to get out. He had chosen his girlfriend, his lifestyle, his perfect apartment over his own mother in her moment of most profound need. The fire had taken my home, but my son had just taken my heart and ground it into dust under the heel of his expensive running shoe. I don't know how long I stood there in that hallway, a statue of grief and disbelief. Eventually, the muffled sound of laughter from inside the apartment, Simone's sharp, triumphant laugh, broke the spell. I turned and walked back to the elevator, my movements stiff and robotic. I felt a million years old. I ended up on a park bench, just a few blocks from Donovan's building. The city was alive around me, the evening rush hour in full swing, but I was in a silent, desolate world of my own. The $100 bills Donovan had shoved at me felt like poison in my pocket. It was blood money, a payoff to make his mother disappear. The sun had set completely, and the park lamps flickered on, casting a lonely, golden glow on the pavement. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the trees above me, a sound that would have been peaceful just yesterday, but now sounded like the whispering of ghosts. I finally opened the scorched shoebox, my sanctuary of memories. My fingers smudged with black trembled as I sorted through the pile of photographs. There was David, looking impossibly young and handsome, holding a tiny bundled Donovan on the hospital steps. There was my mother, her arm around my shoulders at my college graduation, her face beaming with pride. Each photo was a stab to the heart, a reminder of a love that was real, a life that was full, a life that was now nothing but ash and memories. Near the bottom of the pile, I found it, a faded dog-eared photograph from a high school dance. I was 16, wearing a pale yellow dress my mother had made for me. My hair was in a clumsy but hopeful beehive, and next to me, his arm wrapped confidently around my waist, was a boy with the kindest, most intelligent eyes I had ever seen. Marcus Kingston. My first love. My high school sweetheart. We had been inseparable for 2 years. We talked about the future, about building a life together. He was going to take over his father's small construction business and build it into an empire. I was going to be a teacher. We had it all planned out. But life had intervened. My family had to move away unexpectedly, and in a world without cell phones or internet, our teenage love had faded with the miles between us. I'd met David a few years later, and Marcus had become a sweet sepia-toned memory, a ghost from a different lifetime. I turned the photograph over. In my own loopy youthful script, I had written his name, and underneath it, the phone number for his family's business, Kingston & Son Construction. A number I hadn't thought about in 45 years. A strange, desperate impulse seized me. It was absurd. It was irrational. The business was likely gone, the number disconnected. Even if it wasn't, what would I say? Hello, it's Rose, the girl who broke your heart half a century ago. My house just burned down and my son threw me out on the street. Can you help? It was insane. But what did I have to lose? I had already lost everything. My home, my husband, and now, my son. I was at rock bottom, a place where insane, desperate impulses were the only things left. I pulled out my cell phone, its screen blessedly intact. With trembling fingers I punched in the old familiar number. I held the phone to my ear, fully expecting to hear the sterile tritone beep of a disconnected line. Instead it rang. Once, twice. On the third ring, a smooth, professional female voice answered. Good evening, you've reached the Kingston Corporation. How may I direct your call? The Kingston Corporation. Not Kingston & Son. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a long shot, a wild, impossible hope. I'm trying to reach Marcus Kingston, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. It's a personal matter. One moment, please, the receptionist said coolly. The line went quiet. I was sure she was about to come back on and tell me that Mr. Kingston was unavailable, that he didn't take unsolicited personal calls. I was ready to hang up, to chalk it up to a moment of grief-induced madness. And then a voice came on the line. A man's voice. It was deeper now, richer, weathered by time and success, but it was unmistakably, impossibly, his. This is Marcus Kingston. The sound of his voice, a ghost from my distant past, shattered the last of my composure. A sob, raw and ragged, escaped my lips. Marcus? I whispered, my voice breaking. It's Rose Parker. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his sharp intake of breath, the sound of a world shifting on its axis. 45 years dissolved in an instant. Rose? He said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and a deep forgotten tenderness. My God, is it really you? He heard the choked sobs I was trying and failing to suppress. His tone shifted immediately, losing its corporate polish and becoming urgent, concerned. Rose? What's wrong? Where are you? The dam of my grief broke. The words poured out of me, a torrent of pain and heartbreak. I told him everything. The fire, the house, the shoebox, and then, the hardest part, the part that felt like swallowing shards of glass. I told him what Donovan had done. He listened without interruption, a silent, steady presence on the other end of the line. When I was finished, the silence stretched for a moment, thick with unspoken emotion. When he spoke again, his voice was a low, dangerous rumble, laced with a protective fury that I hadn't heard in nearly half a century. That boy is no son of yours, he said, the words a quiet condemnation. Now you tell me exactly where you are. What's the name of the park? I told him. Stay right there, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Don't move. I'm on my way. The line went dead. I sat on the cold park bench, the phone still pressed to my ear, a wild, fragile hope beginning to bloom in the barren wasteland of my heart. Marcus. After all these years, he was coming. Less than 20 minutes later, a sleek black car that looked more like a spaceship than a sedan pulled up to the curb beside the park. It was a Bentley, the kind of car I'd only ever seen in magazines. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. He was older, of course. His hair was cut short and was more salt than pepper. There were lines of experience etched around his eyes and mouth, But the man who walked toward me across the grass was, in all the ways that mattered, the same boy I had known. He was tall and carried himself with an easy, confident grace. He was fit, wearing a tailored navy blazer and gray slacks that spoke of a quiet, understated wealth. And his eyes, as they found mine, were the same, kind, intelligent, and right now, filled with a deep, heart-wrenching concern. He stopped in front of my bench, his gaze taking in my disheveled state, the scorched shoebox, the raw grief on my face. He didn't say a word. He simply sat down beside me, took my soot-stained hand in his and held it. His hand was warm and strong, a solid, comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of my life. We sat there in silence for a long moment, two ghosts from another lifetime, suddenly, impossibly, real. "I'm so sorry, Rosie," he finally said, using the old nickname that no one had called me in decades. His voice was thick with an emotion that went far beyond simple pity. "No one should have to go through this, especially not alone." "I thought I had a son," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "You have a biological issue," he said, his voice hard as steel. "That's not a son, not a real one." He stood up, still holding my hand, and gently pulled me to my feet. "Come on, you're not spending another minute out here." "A hotel?" I said, remembering the crumpled bills in my pocket. "I can get a hotel." He shook his head, a firm, non-negotiable gesture. "Absolutely not. You're not going to be alone in some sterile hotel room. You're coming with me." He led me to the waiting car, opening the heavy door for me. I sank into the plush leather seat, the interior smelling of wealth and security. He slid in beside me and the car pulled away from the curb with a smooth, silent surge of power. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice small. "Home," he said simply. "My home. You'll be safe there." The drive was a quiet journey through neighborhoods of escalating grandeur. We left the glittering towers of downtown behind, and entered a world of old-growth trees, manicured lawns and stately mansions set far back from the road. We eventually turned into a long private driveway, ending in front of a magnificent stone and glass house that seemed to grow organically out of the wooded landscape. It wasn't a guest house he took me to, as I had half expected. He led me through the main entrance of his breathtaking home, into a soaring great room with a fireplace that could have roasted an ox. "This is just for now," he explained, gesturing to a beautifully appointed suite of rooms off the main living area. "It's private, has its own entrance. You won't be bothered, but I want you here, where I know you're safe. You can stay as long as you need. A week, a month, a year. It doesn't matter." He showed me the room. It was larger than my entire downstairs had been. There was a sitting area, a luxurious bedroom, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a five-star spa. A fresh set of clothes, a soft cashmere robe, and pajamas was already laid out on the bed. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the knot of terror in my chest began to loosen. The sheer, uncomplicated kindness of his gesture was overwhelming. After the brutal, conditional love of my own son, the unconditional care from this man I hadn't seen in 45 years was a balm to my shattered soul. I stood in the middle of the opulent room, the scorched shoebox still clutched in my hands, and I finally allowed myself to cry. They were not the ragged, desperate sobs of the park bench. They were the slow, cleansing tears of a woman who had, against all odds, just been rescued. The next morning I woke to the gentle sound of birdsong outside my window. For a blissful, disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. The sheets were softer than any I had ever felt, the room filled with the soft, gray light of dawn. Then the memories of the past 48 hours came rushing back, a tidal wave of fire and betrayal. But this time the despair was tempered by a new fragile feeling: safety. I found Marcus in a state-of-the-art kitchen, making coffee. He was dressed in casual workout clothes, looking vibrant and healthy. He smiled when he saw me, a genuine, uncomplicated smile that reached his kind eyes. "Morning, Rosie," he said softly. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I thought I would," I admitted. He handed me a mug of coffee. "Good. Today we start putting things back together. First things first, we deal with the practicalities. The insurance." He led me to a stunning home office that overlooked a serene Japanese-style garden. He sat me down in a comfortable leather chair and took the seat opposite me behind a large, modern desk. He was all business now, the kind, gentle rescuer replaced by the competent, powerful CEO. "I took the liberty of looking up your policy information through the public property records," he said, turning a monitor toward me. "Standard homeowner's policy, Full replacement value. You should be in good shape. He picked up his phone. Let's make the call together. It's better to get the claim started immediately. He dialed the number for my insurance company and put the call on speaker. After navigating the automated menu, we were connected to a claims agent. Good morning, Marcus said, his voice calm and authoritative. I'm calling on behalf of my client Rose Miller, regarding policy number 74B921. Miss Miller has suffered a catastrophic fire at her insured property. He gave the agent my address and the details of the fire. The agent was polite, sympathetic, and efficient. I see the property here, sir, the agent said after a moment of typing, and I'm very sorry to hear about Miss Miller's loss. I do show that a claim was already filed on this policy this morning. Claim number 9D99045. Marcus and I exchanged a look of pure confusion. I'm sorry, Marcus said, his brow furrowed. That's impossible. Miss Miller has been with me since last night, and hasn't spoken to anyone. Who filed the claim? There was another pause, the sound of more typing. I'm showing the claim was filed online at 7:15 a.m. this morning by the secondary policyholder on the account. And who is that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I already knew the answer. A cold, sick feeling was spreading through me. The secondary policyholder is listed as Donovan Miller, the agent said. Miss Miller's son. The room went silent. Donovan. He hadn't just thrown me out while I was sleeping in a stranger's, no, an old friend's house. My son was already moving to collect a financial windfall from my personal tragedy. The speed, the sheer cold-blooded efficiency of it, was breathtaking. Rose, Marcus said gently, his eyes searching mine. Did you authorize him to do this? I shook my head, trying to make sense of it. And then, a memory surfaced. A conversation from about a year ago. Donovan had come over for one of his increasingly rare visits. He had been full of a strange manufactured concern. Mom, you're all alone in this big house, he had said, his voice oozing with false sincerity. What if something happened? An emergency. I should be on the insurance policy, just as a secondary contact. You know, just in case, so I can handle things if you can't. I had been touched by his apparent foresight. His concern for my well-being. It had seemed like a responsible, loving gesture. I had called the insurance company the next day and had him added to the policy. I had walked right into his trap, blinded by a mother's love, never imagining that the emergency he was planning for was one he intended to profit from. He asked me to add him, I whispered, the words tasting like poison. He said it was for emergencies. Marcus's expression hardened. The compassionate friend was gone again, replaced by the shrewd, suspicious CEO. This is more than just opportunistic, Rose. This is calculated. He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. Has he ever asked you to sign anything else? Any other documents? My blood ran cold. The question hung in the air, heavy and menacing. Another memory surfaced, this one more recent, just a few months before my surgery. Donovan had shown up with a sheaf of papers and a pen. It's just for medical stuff, Mom, he had said dismissively, flipping through the pages quickly. If something happens during the surgery, this just gives me the power to talk to the doctors, make decisions if you can't. It's standard procedure. He had been so convincing, so nonchalant. I was worried about the surgery, my mind preoccupied with my own mortality. I hadn't read the fine print. I had trusted my son. I had signed where he told me to sign. I told Marcus this, my voice trembling. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He simply stood up, walked to his desk and made another call. This time, it wasn't to the insurance company. Michael, it's Marcus, he said, his voice a low, dangerous command. I have a situation. I need you to assemble the legal team. I'm sending you a name and a property address. I want to know everything. Insurance policies, power of attorney filings, the works, and I want it yesterday. He hung up the phone and looked at me, his eyes full of a grim, terrible certainty. I think he said slowly. Your son didn't just throw you out, Rosie. I think he was trying to erase you. The next 24 hours were a blur of quiet, efficient investigation. While I tried to rest to process the escalating horror of my situation, Marcus's legal team moved with the swift, silent precision of a special forces unit. They were a well-oiled machine, accustomed to the high-stakes world of corporate intelligence, and now, all their considerable resources were focused on the small, sordid life of my son Donovan. Late the following afternoon, Marcus called me back into his office. The grim certainty I had seen in his eyes the day before had been replaced by a look of cold, contained fury. On the large monitor on his desk was a digital file, a comprehensive dossier on the secret life of Donovan Miller. "We found it, Rose," Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The power of attorney you signed. It wasn't just for medical decisions." He clicked open a scanned document. It was the paper I had signed, but it was not the simple medical directive Donovan had described. It was a durable power of attorney, a broad, sweeping document that gave him complete control over my financial affairs. It granted him the power to buy and sell property in my name, to access my bank accounts, to manage my investments. It was a complete and total abdication of my financial autonomy, a document I had signed with a trusting hand, while my son lied to my face. "He tricked you," Marcus stated, the words simple, brutal, and true. "He used your surgery, your fear, to get you to sign this. He's been planning this for a long time." My breath hitched. The pieces were all falling into place, forming a picture of a betrayal so profound, so monstrous that my mind could barely comprehend it. The insurance policy, the power of attorney, it was all part of a single horrifying plan. "But why?" I whispered, the question a ragged tear in the silence of the room. "The house, the money. He would have inherited it all anyway. Why do this?" Marcus was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Because he couldn't wait," he said, his voice laced with a deep, weary disgust. He clicked to another section of the file. It was a summary of Donovan and Simone's financial situation. It was a disaster. A series of credit card statements showed tens of thousands of dollars in debt. They had expensive tastes, designer clothes, luxury car payments, lavish vacations, that far outstripped Donovan's modest salary as a mid-level manager, but that was only the beginning. The legal team had uncovered a failed business venture, an online boutique that Simone had started a year ago. They had poured all their savings into it, and Donovan, using the power of attorney he had so cleverly secured, had apparently also borrowed heavily from my own retirement accounts without my knowledge. The business had failed spectacularly, leaving them with a mountain of debt to suppliers and a significant loan from a high-interest private lender. "They're drowning, Rose," Marcus said, his voice softening with a touch of pity. "Not for them but for me. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. They were looking for a miracle, a quick, massive infusion of cash to save themselves." He didn't have to say another word. I understood. I was their miracle, my house, my life's savings, the insurance policy that would pay out a small fortune. I was their escape route. They didn't see me as a mother. They saw me as an asset to be liquidated. The fire, my surgery, my homelessness, it was all just collateral damage in their desperate, greedy grab for my money. They needed me out of the way, either declared incompetent or simply removed from the picture, so Donovan could use his power of attorney to control the insurance claim, pay off their debts, and start fresh with my money. A wave of nausea washed over me. The cruelty of it was almost too much to bear. My son, my Donovan, the little boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose fevers I had soothed, whose future I had invested all my love and hope in, that little boy was gone, replaced by a desperate, greedy stranger who was willing to set his own mother's life ablaze to save himself. As I sat there, reeling from the sheer calculated evil of it all, I noticed Marcus staring intently at another part of the file. His face, already grim, had gone pale. "Marcus," I asked, a new tendril of fear creeping into my heart. "What is it? What else did you find?" He didn't answer immediately. He just kept staring at the screen, his jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked like a man who had just stumbled upon something truly unspeakable. "The fire," he finally said, his voice a low, strangled whisper. "Rosie, a house like yours, a brick house, it shouldn't have gone up that fast." Marcus, a builder by trade, a man who had spent his entire life around construction sites, knew the anatomy of a house fire. He knew how different materials burned, how quickly a fire should spread under normal circumstances. My house had been old, solid, built with the sturdy materials of a bygone era. As he'd said, it shouldn't have been consumed so quickly, so completely. It was as if it had been made of kindling. His suspicion, once voiced, was a terrifying spark in the gasoline-soaked landscape of my son's betrayal. It ignited a new, even more horrific possibility in my mind. "My investigators are thorough," Marcus said, his voice still a low, tense whisper. He had hired a private firm, the best in the business. The moment he'd suspected foul play, they checked for security cameras on your street, Your direct neighbors didn't have any, but a house 3 doors down on the corner had a high-end system covering the whole intersection. He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself. They secured the footage from the night of the fire. He turned the large monitor toward me, his hand shaking slightly as he clicked the play icon. The video was grainy, shot from a distance, the colors washed out in the pale artificial glow of the streetlights. But it was clear enough. It showed the quiet sleeping street in the hours leading up to the fire. A car would pass occasionally, a cat would dart across the road, but otherwise all was still. Then, at 2:13 a.m., a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the frame. The person was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up to obscure their face. They moved quickly, furtively, staying close to the line of hedges that separated the lawns. They were carrying something small, a toolbox perhaps. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the hooded figure approached my house. They didn't go to the front door or the back. They went to the side of the house, directly to the spot where the external gas meter and main line were located. The figure knelt, their back to the camera. They worked for several minutes, their movements quick and efficient. I couldn't see exactly what they were doing, but I didn't need to. I knew. A cold, absolute certainty settled in my soul. When the figure stood up, they turned slightly as if to check that no one was watching. For a single damning second, the moonlight caught their face as they glanced up the street. The hood slipped back just enough. It was Donovan. My son. The air left my lungs in a silent, agonized rush. It was a pain beyond tears, beyond screams. It was the pain of a love so pure and so profound being met with a betrayal so monstrous it defied comprehension. I watched as the image of my son, my only child, turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving behind a ticking time bomb at the foundation of my life. The video played on. An hour later, a small spark, likely from the pilot light of the old furnace, ignited the leaking gas. The side of my house erupted in a silent, ferocious blossom of orange and yellow. The fire, fed by the steady supply of gas, spread with an unnatural, ravenous speed. It was arson. He hadn't just been waiting for an emergency. He had created it. He hadn't just rejected me in my moment of need. He had orchestrated that moment. He had burned down my house, his childhood home with me inside it. All for the insurance money. If I had been a sounder sleeper, if I hadn't been woken by the smell of my own life burning, I would have died in that fire. The video ended. The screen went black. But the image of Donovan's face, illuminated for that one terrible second, was burned into my memory forever. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the blank screen, the silence in the room a roaring abyss. The grief, the shock, the heartbreak, it all coalesced into something new. Something hard and cold and utterly unbreakable. The woman who had cried on the park bench, the frail victim, was gone. She had been incinerated in the same fire that had taken her home. In her place sat a woman who had been pushed past the breaking point, and had discovered not a void but a core of pure unyielding steel. Marcus finally broke the silence, his voice thick with a quiet, terrible rage. "The police," he began. "No," I said. My own voice was alien to me. It was low, steady, and devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a general surveying a battlefield. "Not yet. A trial will be messy, public. He'll play the victim. Hire a smart lawyer who will paint me as a confused, vindictive old woman. I want more than justice, Marcus. I want retribution. I want him to feel the same helplessness he made me feel. I want him to walk willingly into his own ruin." I looked at him, my eyes clear and dry. The tears were gone, burned away by the fire of this final, unthinkable truth. "He thinks I'm a broken, forgiving old woman," I said, a cold, unfamiliar smile touching my lips. "He's about to find out how wrong he is. You have resources, you have a legal team, you have investigators." I leaned forward, my hands flat on his polished desk. "Help me build a trap he can't escape. Help me give my son exactly what he deserves." Marcus looked at the woman before him, this stranger forged in the crucible of her son's betrayal. He saw the fire in my eyes, and he knew it was a fire that would not be extinguished until justice was served. He gave a single solemn nod. "Whatever you need, Rosie," he said, his voice a quiet, unwavering promise. "Whatever it takes." The plan we devised was not born of rage, but of a cold, surgical precision. It was a trap built not with steel and wire, but with psychology and greed. Donovan and Simone were desperate. Their desperation was their weakness, and we would use it to hang them. Marcus's team worked with breathtaking efficiency, Within a day they had established a ghost corporation, an anonymous investment entity, registered in the Cayman Islands with a name that sounded both prestigious and impenetrably vague, Apex Global Ventures. They created a professional-looking website, complete with stock photos of smiling executives and glowing, fabricated testimonials. It was a perfect hollow facade, a digital Venus flytrap. While his team built the trap, my role was to play the part of the perfect bait. I had to become the woman Donovan believed me to be, a forgiving, broken-hearted mother, lost without her son and willing to do anything to win back his affection. It was the hardest role I would ever have to play, an act of emotional self-immolation that scraped my soul raw. I waited 2 days, letting the silence stretch, letting him wonder what had become of his homeless mother. Then, I made the call. I sat in Marcus's office, the recording software active, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice wary, defensive. "Mom, where are you? Are you okay?" I'm right, sweetheart," I said, forcing a believable tremor into my voice. I injected every ounce of maternal pain and love I could muster into the words. "I'm staying with an old friend. She took me in." "Oh," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. My problem had been solved by someone else. He was off the hook. "That's good. That's really good. Donovan," I continued, letting a teary sob catch in my throat. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what you said. And you were right. I've been a burden. I didn't realize it. I'm so sorry if I made things difficult for you and Simone." There was a stunned silence on his end. This was not the reaction he had been expecting. He had been expecting anger, recrimination. My capitulation disarmed him completely. "No, Mom, it's not," he began, a flicker of what might have been guilt in his voice. "It is," I insisted, my voice thick with false tears. "But that's all in the past. What matters is your future." I called the insurance company, Donovan. "I know you filed the claim, and I want you to know, I'm glad you did. You're so much better at handling these things than I am." I paused, letting the bait dangle. "I want you to have the money," I said, the words a physical act of violence against my own soul. "All of it. David and I, we worked our whole lives to make sure you would be secure. This is what we wanted. Use it to pay off your debts. Use it to build a new future for yourself and Simone. Just be happy, baby. It's all a mother ever wants." The hook was set. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the greed warring with a faint vestigial sense of decency. Greed won, as I knew it would. "Mom," he said, his voice now thick with a crocodile's sincerity. I don't know what to say. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I lied. "It's your money now. Do something smart with it. Make your father proud." We hung up, and the moment the line was dead, I doubled over, a dry, racking sob escaping my lips. Marcus was there in an instant, his hand on my back, a silent, steady presence. "You were brilliant, Rosie," he whispered. "Absolutely brilliant." "I just sold my soul, Marcus," I said, my voice muffled. "No," he replied, his voice firm. "You just bought his." The second phase of the plan, launched the next day, an investment advisor from Apex Global Ventures, who was in reality one of Marcus's sharpest young executives, contacted Donovan. He told him he had gotten his name from a confidential list of up-and-coming entrepreneurs. He pitched him an exclusive, can't-miss real estate opportunity in the Cayman Islands, a new luxury resort development with guaranteed, astronomical returns. The catch? It was a time-sensitive deal. They needed a substantial 7-figure cash investment within the next 10 days to secure his spot. It was the perfect bait for a man like Donovan. It offered the promise of massive, easy wealth, and it stroked his fragile ego, making him feel like a chosen one, a player in a game he didn't understand. The insurance company, dealing with a total loss claim and assigned power of attorney, moved quickly. A week later, Donovan had the check, a single piece of paper worth more than he had ever earned in his life. It was the fruit of his monstrous betrayal. He didn't hesitate. Pushed by the ambitious, avaricious Simone and emboldened by his mother's tearful recorded blessing, Donovan went to the bank the day the check cleared. He wired the entire amount, every last cent of the insurance payout, to the offshore account number provided by Apex Global Ventures. The trap was sprung. The money was now secure, sitting in an account that Marcus controlled completely. Donovan and Simone had just willingly handed over the entire proceeds of their crime. But the trap wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about justice. It was time for the final act. The invitation arrived the next day via a sleek black courier envelope. It was an invitation to a celebratory dinner at Aria, one of the city's most exclusive and expensive restaurants, a place Donovan and Simone had only ever dreamed of eating at. The invitation stated that the dinner was to welcome them as the newest investment partners in the Cayman Islands resort project. Their mysterious new business partners were eager to finally meet them in person. It was the ultimate validation of their success, the final confirmation that they had gotten away with it all. They were no longer drowning in debt. They were international real estate investors. Dining at Aria, of course they accepted. The night of the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror in my room at Marcus's house. I was a different woman from the set-stained refugee, who had arrived just a few weeks earlier. I was dressed in a simple but elegant black dress. My hair was styled, my makeup was flawless, but the real transformation was in my eyes. The broken-hearted grief was gone, replaced by the cold, clear light of purpose. I was not a victim seeking pity. I was a judge on my way to deliver a sentence. Marcus was waiting for me in the foyer. He looked magnificent in a dark, tailored suit. He held out his arm for me, his expression a mixture of pride and somber respect. "Ready, Rosie?" he asked softly. "It's time," I said. We arrived at the restaurant before them and were shown to a private dining room at the back. It was an intimate, secluded space with a single table set for four. Two men in suits sat at the table in the main dining room just outside our door, their backs to us. They looked like any other pair of businessmen having dinner. They were detectives, off-duty waiting for a signal. We sat and waited. A few minutes later, Donovan and Simone arrived. They were glowing incandescent with triumph. Simone wore a slinky designer dress that had likely been purchased the moment the insurance check had cleared. Donovan was in a new suit, his face beaming with a smug, self-satisfied grin. They were the king and queen of their own sordid little kingdom, and this dinner was their coronation. They stopped dead in the doorway of the private room, their smiles freezing and then crumbling from their faces as they saw who was waiting for them. The color drained from Donovan's face. Simone's eyes narrowed, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion, and then to a dawning, animalistic fear. "Mom?" Donovan stammered, his voice a weak, reedy thing. "Mr. Kingston? What is this? Where are our partners?" "You're looking at them," I said, my voice calm and even. I gestured to the two empty chairs across from us. "Please, sit down, we have so much to discuss." They stood frozen in the doorway for a long moment, the gears in their heads grinding as they tried to make sense of a scene that was not in their script. The triumph had vanished from their faces, replaced by a deep, primal unease. They were predators who had just walked into a room and realized, with a sickening jolt, that the trap they had been avoiding was not behind them but right in front of them. Slowly, hesitantly, they walked to the table and sat down. Simone recovered first, her natural arrogance reasserting itself. She smoothed her dress, her expression hardening into a mask of defiance. "I don't understand," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "What is this? Some kind of pathetic ambush?" "I'm so glad you asked, Simone," I replied, my voice just as cold. "Because ambush is exactly the right word, though I prefer to think of it as a final accounting." Donovan stared at me, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning to terror. "Mom, what are you talking about? Your money. I was going to invest it just like you said, to make you proud?" The lie was so bald, so pathetic, it was almost laughable. "Oh, Donovan," I said, shaking my head with a slow, pitying sadness. "Did you really think it was that simple? Did you really think I didn't know?" "Know what?" he whispered, his face pale. "I know about the power of attorney you tricked me into signing," I said, my voice quiet, each word a precisely placed stone. "I know about your debts, about the money you borrowed from my retirement account. I know that you and Simone saw my insurance policy as your personal lottery ticket." Simone scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You can't prove any of that. It's the word of a confused old woman against her loving, supportive son." "Is it?" Marcus interjected, speaking for the first time. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that made them both flinch. He reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek, thin tablet. He placed it on the table between them and tapped the screen. The grainy, nighttime security footage filled the screen. They both stared, mesmerized and horrified, at the image of the hooded figure tampering with the gas line at the side of my house. They watched in dead silence as the figure turned, his face illuminated for that one damning second. Donovan made a small strangled sound in the back of his throat. Simone's face went completely white, her perfect makeup a stark, chalky mask. They didn't speak. They couldn't. They were staring at the irrefutable visual proof of their own monstrous crime. It was arson, Donovan, I said, my voice a dead empty whisper. You didn't just leave me to die, you lit the match. No, he finally choked out, shaking his head, his eyes wild with panic. That's not me. It's fake. It's a deep fake. Is it? Marcus said coolly. He tapped the screen again. The video was replaced by a bank statement. It showed the 7-figure wire transfer from Donovan's account to Apex Global Ventures. And I suppose this is fake too? The entire insurance payout, Donovan, sent to my company. You walked right into the vault and handed us the gun, the loot, and a full confession. The finality of it all finally hit them. The arrogance, the denial, it all crumbled into dust, leaving behind nothing but the raw, ugly terror of two criminals who had just been caught. And at that moment, as if on cue, the two detectives from the next table rose and walked calmly into our private room. Donovan Miller, Simone Dubois, the first detective said, his voice quiet but authoritative. You're both under arrest on suspicion of arson, insurance fraud, and attempted murder. The end was swift and absolute. Donovan and Simone, just an hour before so full of triumphant avarice, were led out of the restaurant in handcuffs, their faces a ghastly silent tableau of horror. The other diners watched in stunned silence as the two beautiful, well-dressed people were escorted out like common criminals, their perfect curated world collapsing around them in the hushed, opulent dining room of Aria. The legal process was a formality. Faced with the security footage, the signed confession of the executive who had posed as the investment advisor, and the complete paper trail of the fraudulent wire transfer, they had no defense. They turned on each other, as weak people always do, each trying to blame the other. Simone claimed Donovan had masterminded the whole thing. Donovan claimed Simone had pushed him into it. In the end, it didn't matter. They were both found guilty. Simone was sentenced to 15 years. Donovan, for the act of arson that had nearly killed his own mother, was sentenced to 20. The insurance money was returned to me in full. The legal case was closed. But the story wasn't over. A life had been burned to the ground, and a new one had to be built from the ashes. A year to the day after the fire, Marcus drove me back to my old street. The neighborhood was the same, the oak trees lining the road just as steadfast and familiar as they had always been. But as we pulled up to my property, my breath caught in my throat. The charred, skeletal ruins were gone. The blackened lawn had been replaced by fresh green sod, and where my old house had stood, a new one was rising. It was a beautiful house, a modern but warm design of wood and glass and stone, with large windows that opened onto what would once again be my rose garden. It was a house designed not for a large family, but for one person. A house designed for peace, for light, for a new beginning. Marcus parked the car and turned to me, a gentle smile on his face. The construction crew finished the final walkthrough this morning, he said. It's ready. His company, the Kingston Corporation, had spent the last 8 months designing and building this house for me, a secret project he had been orchestrating since the day of the arrests. He got out of the car, came around to my side, and opened the door. He took my hand and led me up the newly laid stone walkway to the front door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single shiny key. He didn't put it in my hand. Instead, he unlocked the door and pushed it open, then stepped aside. "Welcome home, Rose," he said softly. I stepped inside. The house was filled with the clean, hopeful smell of fresh paint and new wood. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was empty, a beautiful blank canvas waiting for a new life to be painted upon it. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the smooth, unblemished walls. It was a house built not on old memories but on the promise of new ones. It was a foundation of hope, not of history. When I came back to the foyer, Marcus was standing there, watching me, his eyes full of a deep, patient affection. "I know it's not the same, Rosie," he said quietly. "I know we can't bring back what you lost." "No," I said, my voice thick with an emotion that was no longer grief, but a profound, overwhelming gratitude. "It's not the same, it's better." He walked toward me and took both of my hands in his. "I've spent the last 45 years building things, Rose," he said, his voice a low, sincere rumble. "Skyscrapers, bridges, entire communities. I've built an empire, But none of it ever felt as important as this. He looked around the empty, sunlit house, and then his kind, intelligent eyes met mine. My greatest project, the one I want to spend the rest of my life on, he said, his thumbs gently stroking the backs of my hands, is building a new future right here with you, on a foundation of love that never really burned out. He handed me the key then, its cool metal a solid, reassuring weight in my palm, and in the quiet, hopeful space of my new home, with the man who had been my first love and my final rescue, I knew my story wasn't over. It was just beginning.